Saharan dust arrives here today, and there's a chance some folks across the country could see the northern lights this weekend. I'm Craig Cohen. Today on Houston Matters, Space City Weather and Ars Technica's Eric Berger tells us about both.
Houston Matters with Craig Cohen is a production of Houston Public Media with support from Baylor College of Medicine.
Also this hour, from the head of FEMA possibly joking that he didn't know about the Atlantic hurricane season to the National Weather Service now being allowed to hire back some staff, we contemplate intrigues in the news on the good, the bad, and the ugly. Then many popular superheroes are named for or based on animals who, in a way, and as an HMNS exhibit presents, do have superpowers. We learn more. Plus, what makes certain Houston locales unforgettable even after they disappear. We explore the lasting legacies of lost icons. We'll start with a news update from NPR and News 88.7. Stay with us. This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. Good morning. Coming up this hour, the head of FEMA may or may not have been joking this week that he didn't know about the Atlantic hurricane season. We'll talk about that with our non-expert panel on this week's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Also, animals and their superpowers, the subject of a Houston Museum of Natural Science exhibit. Plus, why some Houston locales long gone still endure in Houstonians' memories. But first, Saharan dust arrives in Houston and across the Gulf Coast today, and there is a chance some folks across the country could see the northern lights this weekend, assuming that dust doesn't block their view. Here to explain those weather and celestial phenomena is Eric Berger, meteorologist for Space City Weather and the senior space editor for Ars Technica. Eric, good morning.
Good morning, Craig.
The name might give it away, but what exactly is Saharan dust?
It is dust, surprisingly enough, from the Saharan desert. And we're kind of coming up on the peak of dust season. In June and particularly July, every few days you'll get large amounts of dust blowing up from the Sahara Desert, literally on the west coast of Africa. And depending on sort of how the winds are, the trade winds are, it can be carried pretty far across the Atlantic. And we're getting our first taste of it today and this weekend, and it looks like we may get kind of another round in another week or 10 days from now. Yeah, it's fairly normal for this time of year. Yeah,
you say that the winds can pick it up and carry it across the Atlantic. We were talking about thousands of miles. That's really a thing.
It really is a thing. Yeah, you start to look at the teleconnections on the planet, and you see that everything is pretty much connected. So this is not like dust particles. Like if you go to the beach and pick up a sand particle, you're like, how could this thing be thrown by the wind, thousands of miles? But it's actually sort of smaller, sort of micro pieces of sand. So, and it gets up to 5,000 and 10,000 feet, and it's just kind of carried aloft by these winds. And sometimes it falls out over the Atlantic, but depending on sort of how strong the winds are, it can get all the way to the Gulf.
How can that affect air quality here along the Gulf Coast?
Well, for most people, it's pretty negligible. You look up and the sky looks a little more milky. The sunshine looks a little more reddish. Sunset, excuse me. But for people who are sensitive to air quality, certainly it has effects. It can aggravate allergies. And so for the next couple of days, if you fall in that category, you should spend a little more time indoors. Not that you're going to be outside during the daytime much anyway with the excessive heat we're going to see.
Indeed. Yeah. What other ways does it affect weather conditions here?
It can take a little bit of the top end off of temperature. So if it's going to be 100, it might be 99 or 98 degrees because you've got a little bit more reflectivity in the atmosphere. It actually tends to have a beneficial impact on our soils in terms of growth. It just helps adds a little bit more nutrients to the soil. But overall, the effects are fairly modest.
Do I remember from the last time we talked about this, I guess probably last summer, that it can, in a way, occasionally or at least temporarily stall some developing tropical systems in the Gulf?
No, that's a great point. Like probably the most important role it plays is in impacting hurricanes. And as I said earlier, kind of dust season peaks in July. I'd love to see a peak in August and September because it chokes off the formation of storms in a big way. As you know, like hurricanes form when you get really warm, moist air at the surface rising up into the atmosphere, and that supports the formation of low pressure systems. If you've got a big wall of dust coming in from 5,000 to 15,000 feet, then it just kills that circulation and kills the formation of storms. And so yeah, it's one of the reasons why June and July often see diminished activity in the Atlantic.
Then there are the Northern Lights, which might be visible across parts of the U.S., potentially as I understand, as far south as Alabama on Sunday. This is according to NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center. Could you first remind us what the Northern Lights are?
So periodically, the sun will expel what's called a coronal mass ejection, basically a stream of energized particles, and those interact with our atmosphere, and so you get electrons and other particles kind of whizzing into the atmosphere. They get sort of pulled toward the poles, and so that's one reason why we call them the Northern Lights in our case, is because they're kind of more prominent near the North Pole. When you get a particularly strong geomagnetic storm like this, the aurora can be seen further south. You may recall last year, some areas of the Houston area in October were able to see the Northern Lights. It was really quite spectacular. I'd never seen Northern Lights from the Houston area before. I don't think that's going to be the case this time, unfortunately.
Yeah. I suspected, honestly, that just based off of the basic information about it, that we probably weren't going to be in the space that could possibly see this. But why are these lights likely more visible to more of the country on Sunday than they typically are? As you said last time, it was in October that we saw it this far south.
Well, it's due to the sun, and as I say, it's just the timing of the coronal mass ejection. It takes a bit of time for these particles to get from the sun to Earth, and this just happens to be kind of when our atmosphere is being impacted most significantly by the latest ejection.
All right. So while we have you, a couple of brief forecast questions. We are in our first real stretch of sustained summer-like heat. I know it's likely only going to get worse over the next few months, but what can we expect in terms of temperatures here in the Houston area over the weekend and into next week?
Well, it's certainly going to be really hot on Saturday and Sunday. Sunday may well be the hottest day of the year for many people so far. I have to add that caveat, unfortunately. Fortunately, it does look like the high-pressure system that's been building and going to peak this week is going to back off. So by Monday and especially Tuesday, expect it to be quite a bit cooler. We're talking about highs maybe in the upper 80s, and then a pretty decent chance of rain. So kind of a nice pattern break from the prolonged heat. When high pressure sets up, of course, we get hot, sunny days, and that's what's going to happen this weekend.
When might that rain arrive?
Possibly Monday, more likely Tuesday and Wednesday are looking like the prime days at this point.
Eric Berger is a meteorologist for Space City Weather and the senior space editor for Ars Technica. Eric, thank you very much.
Thanks, Craig.
Up next, more weather-related items from the head of FEMA possibly joking that he didn't know about the Atlantic hurricane season, to the National Weather Service now being allowed to hire back some staff. This week's non-expert panel weighs in on intrigues in the news on the good, the bad, and the ugly as Houston Matters continues. A lot can happen in a week. Some of it good, some of it bad, some of it downright ugly. When faced with intriguing developments in the week's news, we turn to a rotating panel of non-experts to parse the good, the bad, and the ugly of it all. On today's panel, Mary Flood, legal consultant with Androvet Legal Media and Marketing, David Branham, professor of political science at the University of Houston downtown, and Joy Sewing, news columnist for the Houston Chronicle. Mary, David, Joy, welcome to Houston Matters.
Hi, Craig.
Thank you.
Thank you, Craig.
Panel, during a briefing Monday, David Richardson, the acting head of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, reportedly said he was not aware the country has a hurricane season. Reuters reported Monday, based on 4 sources familiar with the situation, that FEMA staff were left baffled by the remark. A spokesperson for the Department of Homeland Security, FEMA's parent agency, said the comment was indeed a joke and that FEMA's ready for the Atlantic hurricane season, which of course began Sunday and lasts through the end of November. And a source tells Reuters Richardson said during the briefing that there wouldn't be changes to the agency's disaster response plans, despite having told staff to expect a new plan last month. Richardson's comments come amid staff cuts and some top officials' departures at the agency. The head of FEMA says he did not know there was a hurricane season here. He might have been joking. Whether he was or not, is this good, bad, or ugly? Mary Flood.
It's ugly, Craig, and it's also a little dangerous. If this was a joke, a whole lot of his staff didn't realize that this was a joke. The new head of FEMA making a joke about hurricane season strikes me like the new head of Health and Human Services saying there are no children in poverty in the United States, or the new head of Veterans Affairs joking that there's no such thing as PTSD. Ha, ha, ha. That wasn't funny. Richardson's boss, the proud dog murderer, Kristi Noem, said that there have been huge cuts in FEMA and getting rid of D.C. bloat, and they're going to leave more of it to the states. But at the same time, the huge cuts that FEMA has done has caused them to not do the seminars that they normally do to the states because they don't have the money for it. I respect his Marine service, but I think he's part of a cadre, a squad of unprepared sycophants that have been appointed by this president. And because my name is Flood, and I've been a reporter in Houston for decades, every editor thought it was hilarious to send me to hurricanes beforehand. Just so you know, the best place to wait for a hurricane is New Orleans, and the worst place to wait for a hurricane is a rickety beach motel down in South Texas.
Oh boy.
But there's no good place to see the aftermath. And there will be life, limb, and homes destroyed, and it's just no laughing matter, and it shouldn't be run by somebody ignorant.
All right. Good, bad, or ugly. Joyce Owing.
Very ugly. I totally agree with 100% with what Mary said. Obviously, he has never been in a hurricane. He's never experienced not having power for 9, 10, 12 days. He hasn't experienced a loss of life, which we've had in many hurricanes through the years. So the fact that even if it was a joke, it's still out of line and unprofessional and disheartening for the people who've actually experienced and survived hurricanes here in Houston.
Okay. Good, bad, or ugly. David Branham.
I don't think. How do you say this is good? Is there a possible option there? It's best. It's a joke that he should not have told. Let's say he already knows that there's hurricane season and so forth. In today's government, especially in the controversial governments that we have, where the other side is looking for anything it can find to criticize you for, a joke like that just opens up the door for all of that. So on the very nicest level, it was a stupid thing to do. And, after the history we had in New Orleans with Katrina, where Michael Brown was Secretary of FEMA and made a complete mess of it during the George W. Bush administration, that is not a joke that people are going to receive well. So on the topic, though, I mean, I personally have been an advocate for Donald Trump saying, okay, we need to put more things on the states because the states they don't have debt like the federal government does. When you're $37 trillion in debt, every single American owes over $100,000 to the federal government. We're in debt bad, and so deferring costs to the states is a good idea. But when you talk about hurricanes, Donald Trump's constituents, that his strongest part of America is those southern states that are hit by hurricanes constantly. So what he's saying is that we should put more strain on those states that are his states. That's his core constituents there. And so now he's going to, with this new policy of, okay, let's put more on the states. Let's let FEMA get cut back. Let's make it where the federal government isn't so responsible. This is going to hurt the very people that vote for him most often. So I'm very interested to sit back and watch what happens during hurricane season. If FEMA does not react in a way that the people of the South will be satisfied with. If they don't, then it's all of a sudden going to be Trump who's going to be criticized more than anybody. And also, you remember back, that was one of his biggest criticisms of Biden, was what happened in North Carolina. And now his administration is actually cutting back further. So I'm willing to sit back and wait, see what happens, and hope the devastation doesn't hurt too badly in the process.
Well, if you're a guy who thinks you can move a hurricane around with a Sharpie, that might explain a lot of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously you can't. But hurricanes don't hit Washington State. They don't hit up on the East Coast very often. Not the northern East Coast. They do every once in a while, but the center of hurricanes are right down at the lower Atlantic coast and the Gulf of Mexico, and those are the people who vote for Donald Trump the most. So he better perform, and this new FEMA director better perform too.
I think that he should relocate his office to this area for during the hurricane season, just so he can, get a hands-on feeling.
So he needs to go to Mar-a-Lago. Until November anyway, right?
Panel, after losing more than 560 employees earlier this year due to Trump administration cuts and retirements, sources tell CNN the National Weather Service has now received permission to hire 125 meteorologists and specialists. The weather agency has had to cut back hours and staff at a half dozen forecast offices across the country so far. It's not exactly great timing with the aforementioned Atlantic hurricane season now underway. In addition to helping to ease the burden on staffing weather forecast offices, staff added back in May eventually allow the agency to increase data gathering weather balloon launches, which have been cut back since the staffing shortages began. The National Weather Service may get about 20 to 25% of recent staff openings filled eventually. Is this good, bad, or ugly? Joy.
Wow, I think it's both good and bad. I think it's good that they are able to add more people back. We definitely need, the National Weather Services and all that it offers. But the fact that so many people lost their jobs behind this, and when you see this with companies where they lay off a bunch of people and then they start hiring people back, it's almost like talking out both sides of your neck. But it's a good and bad thing. And the fact that now, there's so many people who lost their jobs behind the layoffs.
Did you say talk out of both sides of your neck?
Did it? Yeah.
Okay.
Is that this?
Well, I've heard out of both sides of your mouth. I'm trying to imagine how a neck talks.
That's what I was doing too. I was thinking.
Maybe it is. Maybe it is. Maybe his mouth.
I kind of like neck better.
Yeah, I do too.
I don't know. I think I heard neck. I don't know.
I like it.
I like it too.
It gives an interesting image to the mind. Anyhow, good, bad, or ugly.
Maybe
David.
it's a Southern thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's bad, but I don't think that. I think there's probably some positions that needed to be cut in the National Weather Service. And I'm a person, like I said, who believes that we should move some of this stuff onto the states. And so we can do a lot of this at the state level instead of the federal level. But when you cut your employees and then all of a sudden you want them back, you don't get all the best ones back. When you cut these employees, the best ones go out and get jobs elsewhere and will never, ever come back and trust you again. So this isn't the way to get the most productive National Weather Service to me. This is a way of, making sure that, okay, it's doing it for less money, but not necessarily better. Matter of fact, it's probably not going to be better. So on that level, I think it's bad.
All right. Good, bad, or ugly, Mary.
I think it's ugly and dangerous also, but that's a really good point about the good people. And I do think that they were, the fact that they're trying to fix is a good thing because it was such an idiotic mistake. But we lose 560 and get 125. Yeah. There were tornadoes in the middle of the country, and they were having to move people from other offices to try to make sure they were in the right places. Well, all we need is a couple of hurricanes, and that's not going to work. I mean, they're still talking about it not being 24/7. The weather's kind of 24/7, and not being able to put up the same number of weather balloons, which help us predict, This administration has no respect for the rule of law and no respect for public safety. Their only priority seems to be amassing power, getting at their enemies, and maybe making some money. Because my father called himself the Cloud Master, I'm kind of a weather nerd, and I give money to Eric Berger's Space City Weather, and I subscribe to another weather service about hurricanes. And as a woman who kept 2 pairs of rubber boots up to your knees in my trunk for years, because when I was sent out, again, because I thought it was funny, the photographers would always take one pair, so I learned I had to keep 2. I have seen after floods and hurricanes and tornadoes, the tears and the losses, and I just worry that more storms may wreak more havoc with fewer people at NOAA, and I'm scared.
Panel, layoffs are always tough, and when they are announced in large numbers, whole communities are jarred by the news. And that is why residents of Midland County were especially put off when the Texas Workforce Commission announced that Houston-based Chevron planned to lay off 800 workers from its Midland campus. Just one small problem. Chevron only employs about 600 workers there. So was it laying off everybody, closing the facility? And who are these other 200 workers? Well, as the Workforce Commission admitted last Thursday, the number was a typo. 200 are being let go, and that's all Chevron had ever announced. The layoffs will take effect July 15th. According to the Cron's Allison Ackerman, Chevron's trying to relocate as many workers as possible and will offer severance to the others. The Texas Workforce Commission mistakenly suggests Chevron's firing more employees than it has at its facility in Midland. Is this good, bad, or ugly, David?
Well, obviously it's bad to make a mistake. It's embarrassing, but I don't think this is such a bad mistake that it had real hardcore consequences. It just looked ugly. I mean, it's like this is the state that Elon Musk now lives in. So maybe they were taking a lesson in misreporting things here. Yeah. So control yourself, Mary. But yeah, they just misreported it. I'm glad that it's not 800, especially when they only had 600. So I'm glad it's only 200. And but in the end, it was gonna have the same result. The bad thing is that when you make a mistake like this, when you're talking about people's livelihoods, this is a high impact policy that's going in place here, where people's lives are going to change seriously and dramatically. When you do that, you should be more careful about how you report things. This is a pet peeve of mine, and I understand because I make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, but when you're making a report like this of this magnitude, then you should make sure that you're not making a mistake. Get somebody else to look at it. On that level, it's really bad.
All right, Mary?
I thought it was ugly, too. And, Craig, our topics have been all pretty dark. Where were you when you came up with this list here?
I'd had a day.
I guess so. Okay.
A little heavy.
Well, it's really unimpressive of the Texas Workforce Commission. Yeah, they're only a digit off, 800 to 200, but they got the date wrong, too. They need to, maybe check their work or something. After living in Houston so many years and knowing so many people who work in the energy sector, I've seen a bunch of people laid off. And some of them were really happy to be laid off because they get a big package. They know that they have skills that are transportable to all sorts of other companies here in Houston. And I've been laid off once from a law firm, and you question not only your future but your worth, and it's no fun. And I hope these folks recover. And I hope that if part of their recovery is watching the new show, The Landman, that takes place there in the Permian Basin, that Billy Bob Thornton thing, that they have the women characters have actual personalities this next season. And I think that would make these laid off workers feel so much better. Anyway, the workforce.
I sense I've kind of lost the thread here.
Did you?
Yeah.
So did I, obviously. The workforce needs to check their work and learn their numbers.
All right. Good, better, ugly, Joy.
I think it's ugly. I don't know if I can add anything more than what Mary and David have already said. I do think when you are playing with people's livelihoods and they hear a number like that and thinking that everybody is laid off, imagine the emotional turmoil at home when you find out that you're one of 800 people to be laid off, so your whole workforce is shutting down. So I think it's ugly. I think they made a terrible mistake, and I don't think that it should have happened, and I think they need to be more careful. And perhaps they're one of the organizations that had people laid off and hired some people back who don't have the skills.
So bottom line, check your numbers.
Check your numbers.
All five of our panelists agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a difference between a million and a billion. It's not just one letter.
But Chevron didn't get anything wrong. And one of the early Cron headlines said Chevron reported it wrong, but they didn't. And these guys are.
Oh, so we got it wrong too. Okay.
Well, having worked there for many years, I occasionally would make a mistake too.
Yeah, we all do. We all do.
I wonder what that feels like. Mary Flood is a legal consultant with Androvet Legal Media and Marketing. David Branham is a professor of political science at the University of Houston downtown. And Joy Sewing is a news columnist for the Houston Chronicle. Mary, David, Joy, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Craig.
This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. Batman, Spider-Man, Black Panther, Wolverine. Many popular superheroes are named for animals. A new exhibit at the Houston Museum of Natural Science explores some of the superpowers that really do exist in the natural world, taking a bit of inspiration from some of those pop culture icons. Houston Matters producer Joshua Zinn has more.
It's like stepping into a comic book as you enter Extreme Animals Alive at the Houston Museum of Natural Science. The walls are covered in eye-popping visuals, bold letters, colorful illustrations, and words like super, wow, and cool. As the museum's vice president of education and curator for the exhibit, Nicole Temple explains, this theming was a pretty obvious choice.
All of these these things have these superpowers.
Yeah.
So we were thinking of it as like comic book superheroes. And then there are references to that. So, for example, Earth's Mightiest Heroes refers to the Avengers.
Right.
So you'll see graphic novel covers. You'll see the theme sort of carried out on the walls with the white lines. The text panels are set up in such a way that they sort of reflect that. And then we also have animals that reflect the very specific thing that we're trying to show you.
So, as you go through the exhibit, you'll see phrases like super speed or super mind control or super sturdy, and a variety of animals that have developed some kind of adaptation that gives them those abilities. For instance, something as unassuming and vulnerable as a clownfish has a pretty unique method of survival.
Another one in this superpower section is we have clownfish. So they're cool because in a group there'll be a female and a male, and you can't see my hands, but I'm making them big.
Yeah.
And then there'll be a bunch of little teeny males that are hanging out there.
Yeah.
If something happens to the female and she dies or gets eaten or goes away, the male, the mating male becomes female, and then one of the smaller males becomes the new alpha male.
Wow, so that's crazy adaptation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. And while growing back an entire body part might seem only fit for comic book characters like Wolverine or Deadpool, the museum highlights an amphibian that does it for real and to a pretty extreme degree.
The axolotl, they are super good at regeneration, so they can regrow their limbs, they can regrow their gills, and if they end up having something happen to their head, they can regrow their brain. So if they have just a little piece of brainstem left, they can regrow. Yeah. So we're looking into, like, science is looking into how you can turn on and off those genes to try and figure out how to eventually be able to do this for humans.
Yeah, wow. So there, not only is this cool and fascinating, there's potentially practical use for a lot of this.
There's practical use for almost every adaptation.
Yeah. On the topic of amphibians, I like to consider myself fairly knowledgeable about animals. I did watch a lot of Animal Planet and Discovery Channel as a kid, but even I was surprised by some of the adaptations on display here.
These are all animals that live in the Arctic, which is the northern pole, not the Antarctic.
Right.
And my favorite thing in here is probably this wood frog.
Ooh.
So he's the smallest thing in there, and you could possibly miss him. He's right at the end. So wood frogs' deal is they have more basically sugar in their blood than any other animal. And if it was that amount of sugar in a human, it would cause you to go into a diabetic coma like hundreds of times over.
Oh, wow.
But because of that, they don't have much water in their blood. So they are able to freeze solid without having crystals, which is what causes damage to human tissue.
Right.
And so they just sort of get sludgy. And then when the spring opens back up, the sludge goes back to being a liquid, and then they hop off, and then the blood sugar level goes down, and then it goes back up for winter.
Wow.
So they're the only amphibian that can live north of the Arctic Circle.
I've never heard of this animal.
That's the point of the
so cool.
exhibit. That's what we're doing here.
It's also worth noting that while several of the creatures represented here are either illustrations on the wall or taxidermy mounts, the exhibit does actually feature some live animals as well. For instance, Eustace.
My favorite animal in here is probably Eustace.
Eustace? Okay,
Yeah.
let's talk about Eustace.
He is a six-banded armadillo, and each one of the animals has its own little bio card.
Yeah.
So we've given you the name, Eustace. His favorite food is super worms and papaya.
Great.
And then his likes are looking dead even though he's sleeping and getting into everything.
But getting into everything has 3 exclamation points.
Because he is a menace and we all love him.
Of course, with keeping live animals, that adds a whole dimension of planning to what the museum wants to do. They have to have animal specialists on hand and volunteers to help. And they also have to do their research to make sure they're prepared for what they're bringing in.
When we were selecting animals, it was sort of a grid of what we can reasonably take care of in a way that is appropriate for that animal versus like what fits into the criteria. So like, yeah, I mean, we could have had a live camel. They're really cool. They have a Henley loop, but
Right.
that is not a feasible thing for us to
Right.
take care of. So you probably noticed that a lot of the fennec foxes, they're pretty small, but they have a gigantic enclosure, and we have provided them places to climb, to romp, to frisk, to sunbathe, to, do all the things. And then they also get interactions with their keepers, and we add toys in there and do things to that. And then we also have enrichment activities. So Eustace, the armadillo, he super loves investigating. So when somebody's working in a room, they'll take him with him.
Oh.
Yeah, and so then he just sort of like noodles around in all the corners, and we have things for him to hide.
Yeah.
He'll come when you call him.
Huh.
So a lot of research, a lot of people who are experts in animal care.
Yeah.
A lot of time.
Yeah. A lot goes into this.
Yeah,
I can
constructing little treats and toys.
While fennec foxes and armadillos are pretty cute and cuddly, you can also find some live specimens that are specially adapted to nighttime and are maybe not as cuddly, but still interesting, but also maybe a bit scary depending on your tolerance. Arachnophobes, maybe cover your ears for a minute.
So wolf spiders are a really common spider just generally, but they're also really common in Texas. But if you take your flashlight out at night and you hold it so your thumb's on the base of it and the light is pointing down, and then bring your fingers up to your eyeball, kind of like where my glasses arm is, and you just look in your backyard, anything you see shining and reflecting back at you is probably wolf spider eyes.
Really? Mm-hmm. That's cool and also a little creepy.
So you probably have, like hundreds or thousands of wolf spiders in your backyard, and you just don't ever see them.
These are the kind of brownish gray spiders that people probably see in their homes that move really fast, and maybe like I see they like long walks at night and jump scaring people.
Yes, that's in their bio. And if I find one in my house, I will try and pick it up and move it outside. But if I see it in my house, I'm like, you do you, buddy. You're eating whatever I don't see.
Yeah.
You're doing vacuuming.
That's right. The exhibit culminates with a pretty diverse array of live aquatic animals, things like rays and little sharks and sea stars, and a creature that maybe doesn't look like much on the surface, but has a lot going on underneath.
The last gallery is Super Survivors. And this comic book cover is my favorite. It's a sea cucumber. I just like the colors, but it's a sea cucumber, and sea cucumbers are amazing. So they are blobs that live in the ocean, and I think of them as, there was a toy when I was a kid, and you may have had one too, where it was like a tube of water, and you gripped it.
You squeeze it, and it would move, and it would kind of fold in on itself.
Yeah. That's a sea cucumber. So their special skill is surviving anything. If they don't have access to food, they'll eat themselves. And then when they find food again, they'll grow back to their normal size. If they're scared, they excrete all their internal organs to scare off the predator, or they'll kind of turn themselves inside out. They're like little mobile colons. They just eat sand, spit it out the back, so they're cleaning things as they go. They also, if scientists try and study them, and you try to mark them in any way, so you spray them with something like a dye, or you cut them to make a mark, or you glue a tracker to them, within a couple hours they're like, nope, and they
they get rid of that.
They've tried to inject tracking chips in them, and they just go boop, 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 and it spit it out the side of their body after a couple hours.
That's really cool. So if you'd like to take a visit yourself or bring the kids along to learn about some of these super-powered critters, Nicole has some advice on that front.
I would say if you want to come, one of the best times to come is going to be in the morning, because everybody will be transitioning from the time of day that they're normally awake. So you'll see more of the animals then. And starting in the week of June 16th, then we're going to have animal interactions, and there's going to be a touch card available between about 10 o'clock and about noon and 1 to 3. So you'll be able to pet something or look at something. Cool. We want you to be able to look at the scorpion up close. We don't want you to pet the scorpion.
No. For Houston Matters from the Houston Museum of Natural Science, I'm Joshua Zinn.
And in that report, we heard from Nicole Temple, Vice President of Education at the Houston Museum of Natural Science. Extreme Animals Alive is on display now at HMNS. Still to come, what makes certain Houston eateries and music venues unforgettable long after they're gone. The lasting legacies of lost icons as Houston Matters continues.
I'm Christy Beer, and I'm a poet. I was writing poetry when I was really young, and I wrote some really pretty heavy poetry when I look back at it when I was 8 or 9 years old. And then for a long time, I didn't write poetry. I think once you start reading really good poets, I became more intimidated and thought, there's no way I can do this. And then I came back to it again. I think a lot of people, when they're just doing it for themselves, come back to it when you have a kind of a crisis in your life. And so when I was going through a divorce, I started writing poetry again. So I've been writing poetry now for 15 or 20 years. I tell a story usually. It's pretty autobiographical because I'm really writing in my poetry for myself and not to get it published. And so for me, it's a form of therapy. It helps me work things out. Poignant moments inspire me the most, I think. And that can happen anywhere, just something that grabs at my heart. The title of this poem is Snapshot. Well, this was after my divorce and when I met my current fiancé. I really didn't want to go out with him. This was inspired by our first date, which turned out much better than I thought it would. Snapshot. You on our first real date, knocking on my door and looking more handsome than I'd remembered. Me, later, shivering on the Rice campus as you showed me your old haunts, then wrapped your arm around me, though I was still wary, having never dated a Republican before. After coffee, an unexpected trip to the psychic next door. The whole family watching TV around the dinner table at 10 p.m., the smell of sautéed spices still simmering in the air. Immigrants just trying to make a living like the rest of us. She took my hand and told me not to worry, that I was a good mother, and you were my soulmate. $10, please, which she tucked tidily into her Bible while I tried to overhear what her daughter was telling you, one bedroom over. Later still, although I had no intention, your light touch under my sweater catapulting me to a different dimension, a black hole perhaps, my lips devouring yours and sealing, it seems, our fate. I'm poet Christy Beer, and you're listening to Houston Matters.
The Turkey Leg Hut is now known more for its alleged involvement in an arson. Fitzgerald's is now just a parking lot, and the Spaghetti Warehouse was flooded during Hurricane Harvey. Restaurants and music venues come and go, especially in a city as vast and varied as Houston. Yet some stay with us for years after they're gone, and we speak of them fondly, even if the food wasn't great or the music wasn't memorable. Houston Matters producer Brenda Valdivia talks with food writer David Leftwich and musicologist Flash Gordon Parks about the enduring appeal of Houston's lost iconic venues.
I'm really interested in how Houston has spaces that evolve over generations. Like if you're in your 60s, maybe you know that location as being something totally different than your grandchildren. Turkey Leg Hut specifically, before it was that, or before it was in the location off Elmeda, it was Scrappy Brown's. And then before that, it was a club called the Lieber Lounge, which was a great spot, neighborhood club, was notorious for having the heavy pour, like drinks were cheap but really strong, and it was iconic amongst the community in that regard before Turkey Leg Hut took it over and became what it became. But there's so many venues like that. Another one that right now, Alley Cat, is a bar that's off of Alabama and Maine, right next to the Continental Club. But before it was Alley Cat, it was the Mink. And then before it was the Mink, it was A Bar. And all three of those venues has its own history and its own importance in music. And so it's just interesting how these places like take shape and become something totally different from the original space. And there's so many like clubs and bars downtown that are like that as well.
See, that brings me up to my next question. What makes this place so different? Because there are so many restaurants and music venues and stadiums. They all fill it with folks, and some of them hit and it's the it spot, and then they peter away and they're forgotten. And then there's others that don't nearly have all those bells and whistles and that gravitas, but they have that staying power. What's the difference between those two?
I mean, for one thing, for restaurants, I think Houston diners can be fickle. I mean, we have a lot of options. There's a lot of competition. Rents should go up. Lots of different things. Because I think about that too. There's restaurants that I feel like this, and it may not be like even like have the best food, but just have good staying power because they have a lot of, the people have a lot of memories, a lot of connections to those places. Even say something like a Good Company seafood or something, that's a place that has stuck around, it's expanded, the Good Company barbecue. And I think part of these things is some of it's smart business ownership, but some of it, people just build up memories there. Family, grandparents go there, then the kids go there, they celebrate birthday parties, and then other things, it's also just, Houston is a tough real estate market. You were talking about music venues, like Fitzgerald just got bought and torn down by a Chicago parking company and then they never even built the parking garage that was there. It's still just an empty parking lot. In terms of places, Houston is notorious for tearing things down and building something new or repurposing what gives something a staying power. Sometimes it's a mystery. I have to admit, it's like
I much rather when the purpose gets repurposed, right?
Yeah.
Like when the history of the building can be 160 years old and still be functional. There's a ton of places like that downtown.
Like what places?
So for instance, Off the Record, which is a new sort of trendy vinyl bar that's downtown on Main Street. Before that, it was numerous venues. More memorable was Bovine and Barley right before it became Off the Record. But if you go to the space right now and you look right at the door, it says exactly what the building used to be in the early 1900s, late 1800s. The fact that the stone is still there to tell you what this company used to be, And there's a few like lofts that are like that, right? That still have the original brick or the original framing of what it was.
Is being notorious, does that also help a place stick around? Because, there were rumors about Turkey Leg Hut for a while before those rumors became allegations and lawsuits. There was also, I'm thinking of Late Night Pie, which was unfortunately burned down in an arson attack. Does that help make a place more iconic?
I'm sure it does, because I think people, at least for a while, people get curious or people hear these stories. I mean, there is kind of that, people want to hear these things. They want to find out for themselves. I don't know if it's a long-term business plan that's going to keep you going, strategy. But I'm trying to think if there's you kind of think of, I won't name names of places related to Galveston, because there's, those long-standing rumors about, the mafia, or, you don't want to say too much. People get it. So there are certain people that get their hackles raised. But, there are those things where those kind of things.
Just a reminder for our listeners, these are unconfirmed rumors. We make no accusations.
Yeah, and these are some of them
about fun places.
And some of them are very old, too, that have been. But
there's also like that same thing about like Market Square. It was rumored, especially in the early ZZ Top moving sidewalk era of music. Like it was supposedly Mafia ran a lot of those clubs around there. Which I think you can't get around that at some point in time. Organized crime was involved in a lot of entertainment.
Yeah.
I mean, just to be on all levels, not just, Italian centric, but all types of activities, whether it was, late night gambling or, illegal gambling or, some type of prostitution. Like there's something always in a red light district sort of manner going on.
Or stories of after hours bars and stuff that you and then there is the bar that's attached to it that's I think of a particular location that the bar there's the legitimate bar and then there's the after hours bar upstairs. Those places have had their allure over time. I can think of being interested in going places because of that. So I think those kind of notorious, that notoriety that comes with that can be an allure and keep places going, at least for a while.
Right. And not to cut you off, but to keep it going, it's interesting that, like speakeasies have become full circle now. So a lot of venues are, hanging their hat on the whole concept of like, this is a front, but if you go behind the curtain or you go through the back door, and then this is the real thing. And so it's interesting to see that concept kind of come back into pop culture.
It is kind of fun. I did go to a place in Austin that had a speakeasy vibe. You would walk into this office building and it looked like just a closet. But I just remember laughing at the idea of a speakeasy that you had to put in a reservation.
Yeah, they're
this
more of a marketing gimmick than the real deal.
$30 cocktail does not a speakeasy make. But what are there places that are new that you're feeling that sense of, you might be around for a long time in people's hearts and memories, even if the business doesn't stick around? This is for David Leftwich.
Well, I was going to say, because I was going in two different directions there, because, there's places like Lola's, the dive bar, that's still notorious for its bathrooms, still kind of has that kind of allure. And then I think of a place that just closed, Good Dog Hot Dog, which I think had been open for 10 years, and they were a food truck, and they may even redo the food truck. It's a very community-oriented place that I think people are going to miss. And then, places now that are thinking, I think some of the barbecue places, like I think of some place like Gatlin's, if that ever closes, then I would knock on wood, we don't want that to close. But I feel like some places like that, or, have built up warm, family-oriented, a lot of places where people celebrate memories.
How about you, Flash?
I think there are a lot of cool spaces like that. When I think about spaces where DJs can stretch out and play music, I mean, like a place like The Flat that's been around for 20 years now. It's changed ownership in the span of its popularity, but it's still a staple, especially for young partygoers that are looking for sort of an alternative to nightlife, not necessarily like you're going to hear the same thing every night that you go. All the amazing shows I've seen there. There's a place like 5015, which is a part of that turkey leg hut lure, or a part of that conversation because of the drama that surrounded it. But 5015 is still creating an atmosphere that people want to experience, every weekend, whether it's bringing legacy artists to perform on the outside patio, but it's still a place of importance, I feel, in the community. And then there's a place like Davenport's. It's a small bar, but it's still important. People still flock to it. They don't do any promotion or like if you know. Same with Poison Girl. Shout out to Scott. They do a great job. Probably the best pinball machine collection in the city.
Whiskey in one hand, pinball in the other. Life is good.
Right. I feel like Houston has a lot of gems like that, Danny Electro's, the diversity, and then also the staying power of these spaces. It is always a mystery how things are able to survive, and those that do survive, when you think about what's really there and what's at the core of it, it's really simple. Do one thing really good. If you can do that, you have a good chance of sticking around in the city, I believe.
Musicologist Flash Gordon Parks there. We also heard food writer David Leftwich from our monthly conversation, The Full Menu. They spoke with Houston Matters' Brenda Valdivia. And that's it for today's show. The Houston Matters team includes Michael Haggerty, Joshua Zinn, Brenda Valdivia, Mincho Jacob, and Laura Walker. Jared Carroll's our technical director. On Monday's show, we'll visit the headquarters for Life Flight to learn how the air ambulance service has evolved over nearly 50 years serving Greater Houston. Also, we welcome your gardening questions from Meg Tapp from the Garden Club of Houston. With still a decent amount of heat and some rain in the forecast, I imagine you may have some questions about your garden. You can send them now to talk@houstonmatters.org. And the automatic ball strike system will indeed come to Major League Baseball next season. What might it mean for Houston Astros hitters, pitchers, and catchers? We will discuss with Believe in Astros podcast co-host Jeff Balke. I'm Craig Cohen. Have a great weekend. Then join us Monday for those and other Houston Matters.